So you're not supposed to say shalom, so I'm just going to say hello. I think that's going to be the solution for now. And Erev Tisha B'Av is a time that I think for all of us is very hard to be away from camp. I was telling Paul that I didn't really know what to make for Seudah Mafseket because I'm used to Paul making my Seudah Mafseket. And I think, and also I don't know how tomorrow's going to go by. I'm used to Chana keeping me very busy throughout Tisha B'Av from dawn till dusk. And what am I going to do all day tomorrow? So if you get bored tomorrow, you can call me and we'll talk and you'll keep me busy because we're used to running a lot of programs on Tisha B'Av. So thank you, first of all, to Chana and to Camp and to Aryeh for this opportunity. And I think that it's very meaningful to invest time on Erev Tisha B'Av, on Leil Tisha B'Av, to give meaning and inspire the fast, because it's very hard to fast when you don't feel inspired by the fast. So let's try, what we're going to try to do today is really, today and I think also tomorrow in the programming is really inspire this day with meaning. And I hope that together it'll be a meaningful Tisha B'Av that'll hopefully, I don't know, that we won't have to commemorate Tisha B'Av in the future, but rather just celebrate Binyan Yerushalayim and Shivat Zion. This is also an opportunity really to learn Torah together all over the world, or in Israel and in North America. And it's something that I don't think we could have imagined in previous years, that we could have this ability to do it this way. And while it's very sad that we're not in camp together, it's very special to be able to connect through the content and the meaning of Tisha B'Av. I think that this Tisha B'Av finds all of us wherever we are in very different than previous Tisha B'Avs, not only in the sense that we're not in camp. I'm sure maybe perhaps statistically some of the people on these screens are in quarantine or were in quarantine. And when we read the words Eicha yashba badad, so badad in Hebrew translates to bidud and to what we call in modern Hebrew the quarantine. And when we think about to be bebidud or to be alone, so it's something that the word badad didn't have this meaning last year when we read Eicha yashba badad. We thought about loneliness of Yerushalayim, we thought about the exile, we thought about the destruction. But somehow in modern Hebrew today, the word badad, you can't hear it without thinking of ani bebidud, ani lo bebidud, my friends are bebidud, my relatives are bebidud. And Yerushalayim tonight is also bebidud. So tonight we have this ability to share some of Yerushalayim's feelings in a way that in previous years we were not able to feel. I think in another sense, when we entered Tisha B'Av of 2020 and we did it, we heard Eicha, some of us on Zoom, some of us in the outside of their Bet HaKnesset and not inside Bet HaKnesset, obviously not in the pavilion like we would in camp, but also the feeling of galut and exile that we talk about in the sense of Yerushalayim and the destruction 2,000 years ago. So when I sat today in the on this migrash outside where there was an Eicha reading, I felt to myself that we are in exile from our Bet Knesset, or I'll say it in a different way. If we had Bet HaMikdash and then we went on exile and built our Mikdash Me'at, our Batei Knesiot and Batei Midrashot all over the world, so now we're even on exile from them. So we're like even a step away from, how should I say, what the Jewish people created in the last 2,000 years in order to fill in the gap of the loss or the lack of Bet HaMikdash. So we had Bet HaMikdash, and then we had a galut to a Mikdash Me'at, to a Bet Knesset. And now, because of this situation and the COVID-19 and Corona, we're on a galut from the Bet Knesset. And I can tell you that on a personal sense, that galut I think is very, very painful. And I think that when we felt it tonight, if we heard Eicha on Zoom or outside of our Bet Knesset, and I think definitely if we look ahead and we think about the Yamim Noraim and experiencing them out of Bet HaKnesset, that feeling of galut and that feeling of Eicha yashba badad becomes even more intense. So I think that when we enter Tisha B'Av of this year, for those of us who felt Tisha B'Av in camp throughout the years, it's obviously very different, but I think it's very different also for everybody else. And tonight we have this opportunity to feel that. And in the next few minutes, I want to talk about something that a friend of mine shared with me, and when I looked into it more, it became very, very mashmoti. And I think that in today's day and age, how should I say it? We sort of stay away from like our emotions translate into like emojis on our phone, but really like we express our emotions in a pretty politically correct way, We smile and we hum and we frown and we this and we that, but we're very, very, and the modern world has made us very containing people to our emotional world. And I think that's something that's very strong that we see in Megillat Eicha. And in the whole concept of Tisha B'Av is the idea of crying, of bechi. And I would like to share the screen and show you. I would like to share the idea of bechi in the context of Tisha B'Av. Here, wait, hold on. Let's get this here so I can see you also. Very powerful pasuk that we sing in camp also is Al Ele Ani Bochia. And the idea of bechi is something that's almost like the soundtrack of Tisha B'Av. The idea of bechi, mamash to cry, it's something that it meets us today only in very extreme moments. The Western world isn't a very cranky world, I would say it like that. Like, we're not cranky in the kvetchy way, but crying, pashut livkot. And somehow when we connect to Tisha B'Av, we see that the idea of bechi is something that appears again and again in many, many formulations. It starts really from that very first Tisha B'Av in the Tanakh, when we talk about what was the first Tisha B'Av, and it's when the spies, the Meraglim, come back from their tour of Eretz Yisrael, and they give their negative or pessimistic report. And the pasuk says, and I'm bringing it in the Gemara in Masechet Ta'anit, it says, "Vatisa kol ha'eda vayitnu et kolam vayivku ha'am balayla ha'u." Okay, so they hear everything, they hear the report, and they cry. Amar Rabba Amar Rabbi Yochanan, oto hayom Erev Tisha B'Av haya. Okay, it was Erev Tisha B'Av according to the dates, and we're not going to get into that now. Amar lahem HaKadosh Baruch Hu, atem bechitem b'chiya shel chinam, ve'ani kovea lachem b'chiya ledorot. Let's translate. HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells them, you cried with no reason, because Eretz Yisrael is really a wonderful and beautiful and special place to go. So there's no reason to cry. But because you cried with no reason, I'm going to make this date a date on which you're going to cry for generations. And Charav HaBayit, and then Charav HaBayit Rishon, and Bayit Sheni, etc. And many, many other tragic events happened on Tisha B'Av. And here's an opportunity to say Kol HaKavod to whoever created the camp pamphlet, which is absolutely beautiful and really gives a lot of information and special things about Tisha B'Av. But the Midrash basically comes along and tells us that Tisha B'Av was a night where people cried, and it became, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, after Am Yisrael cried during Chet HaMeraglim, it will become a night in which we will cry for generations. And the idea of this night being a night of crying appears in Megillat Eicha again and again, and I only brought from Perek Aleph and Bet, but really it continues in Perek Gimel and Perek Daled. But we see the idea of mamash bechi, the word bechi, livkot. Okay, the verb mamash livkot, bachot tivke balayla v'dimata alechia. Al ele ani bochia, eini yorda mayim. Kalu b'dmaot einai, my eyes are tearing. Chomat bat Zion, oridi kanachal dim'a yomam v'layla. Kumi roni balayla, shifchi kamayim libech. We see this idea of crying mamash again and again and again, and it appears mamash, the tears almost come out when you see how much crying is mentioned here. This idea in Tisha B'Av continues in the Haftarah, and we read it tomorrow morning. And Yirmiyahu says, Mi iten roshi mayim ve'ini mekor dim'a ve'evkei yomam balayla. And again, al ha'arim esa bechi v'nehi, al neot midbar kina. Okay, so these kinot. And again, כה אמר השם צבקות, התבוננו וקראו למקוננות ותבונה, ותמהרנה ותיסנה עלינו נהי, ותרדנה עינינו דמעה, ועפפינו יזלו מים. Okay? So we come along and see, let's make the screen large for a second, let's stop the share. What we see here is that we have this idea of bechi that appears mamash as the soundtrack of Tisha B'Av. There's many midrashim about the words al ele ani bochia or eini yorda mayim, but they just take more space. And I wasn't going to zoom in onto the midrashim, but there's an idea here that on Leil Tisha B'Av, everybody's crying. The Navi Yirmiyahu is leading the crying. Am Yisrael is crying. The Shechina is crying. Rachel Imenu is crying. There's this idea of this communal bechi. Vatisa kol ha'eda v'tivke. And I was trying to think about this idea of the bechi and the idea of the crying, and really because we don't cry so much in our world today. Crying is one of those motions, I'd like to say, that I think that the inside and the outside come together. The physical tguva, I need help here with the English, the physical expression of the emotions and what's going on inside and the emotional feelings, they sort of intertwine. They sort of happen together. I think it happens also when we laugh. When we laugh, our body and our mind are like synced. That happens also when we cry. And there's something very, very powerful about those moments where our physical expression and our emotional state sort of collide. And we see that happening in a very, very sad way on Leil Tisha B'Av. And I think it's very powerful when it happens to us. And I think that here also, how should I say it? Like tomorrow at this time, we'll all feel, not at this time in Israel, at least the fast will be over. But at some point along the fast tomorrow, we're going to feel very hungry. Okay, our physical body is going to say, hey, we're very hungry. And the question that we're going to ask ourselves is, do I emotionally feel that same absence? Like, is there like, are we synced, our emotional and our physical existence? I think what we're trying to do tonight is really inspire our emotional and cognitive identity with the physical feelings of the fast that we're going to feel tomorrow. But there's something about bechi, that when we cry, we have a physical expression of what's going on inside in our emotional world. And that's very, 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 I think, powerful to feel. I think that crying and that idea of crying on Tisha B'Av, let's take it 2 more steps ahead. I'd like to share really 2 quick stories. I think we're all very familiar. I think we've told this story in camp like a gazillion times about, Napoleon that comes at night and he sees Jewish people crying and he asks, why are they crying? What happened? And this and that. And they explain to him that they're actually mourning. Why am I not managing to move the screen? And he responds, like that. And here. I'm good. Ari, I think I'm okay. Yeah, here, share. Okay, and he responds and he says, a nation that cries and fasts for over 2,000 years for their land and temple will surely be rewarded with the future temple. And Napoleon recognizes that, and we understand that this crying, the ability to once a year sort of pause and connect to that crying of the generations about Churban HaBayit is very powerful, and Napoleon recognizes that. But Erev, now I need your help to move to the next slide. How do I move to the next slide? Oh, yesha. I'd like to share another story that I found. It's all in Hebrew. I'm going to read it and translate it. Okay? I'd like to share another story about Rav David Kahana. He was a rabbi in the Kohen HaMizrahi. What? Rav David Kahana. He was a rabbi in the beginning of the 20th century in Europe. He survived the Lvov ghetto. He became the chief rabbi of the Polish army after the Holocaust. Then he made Aliyah in 1950, and he became the rabbi of Chel HaAvir. I'd like to share a story about him, okay? הייתי בן 9, I was 9 years old, ילד קטן ממשפחה חילונית. Okay, I grew up in a secular family, שרגליו הוליכו אותו משום מה לבית הכנסת בשכונה של סבא וסבתא. ערב 9 באב, והרב דוד כהנא, עם פנים מלאכיות וזקן לבן, קם מכיסו והתיישב על מדרגות הבימה כמנהג המתאבלים. So this boy writes how he was 9 years old, he came from a secular family. On Erev Tisha B'Av, he goes to the shul of his grandparents, and he sees this rabbi, Rav David Kahana, which is a Holocaust survivor, and is the chief rabbi of Chel HaAvir, and now he's a rabbi of a shul in Tel Aviv. עם פנים מלאכיות, with his angel face and a white beard, קם מכיסו והתיישב על מדרגות הבימה, he's sitting on the steps of the בימה, כמנהג המתאבלים, like a mourner. בעל הקריאה החל בשירת פסוקי מגילת איכה, okay, so they're starting to lay in איכה, ולפתע, and suddenly, נשמע קול בכיו של הרב הקשיש, בכי חרישי ועצוב. Suddenly they hear the rabbi of the shul, this Rav David Kahana, starting to cry. הייתי בן 9 ונדהמתי מן הקולות. I was 9 years old and I was shocked. אני זוכר כי חזרתי לבית, I went back home, ושאלתי את סבי, I asked my grandfather, האם באמת בכה הרב על בית המקדש שחרב לפני 2,000 שנים? I asked my grandfather, was Rabbi Kahana crying for בית המקדש that was destroyed 2,000 years ago? את תשובת סבי אינני זוכר. I don't remember what my grandfather answered me, אך כעבור מספר שנים מועטות, כבר ידעתי לבדי, היינו on my own, כי בבכיו של הרב התערבבו זה מכבר חורבנות העבר יחד עם המראות אותם ראה כחיל הבריגיאדה בערי אירופה. A few years later, when I got to know the rabbi better, I understood that the crying from Eicha blended and mixed up with him with crying for the destruction of what he saw as a brigade soldier in Europe, מפגשיו כרב צבאי, משפחות שכולות, what he had to do as a military rabbi in Tzahal by meeting families who lost their kids in the army, צערו על מספר המתפללים ההולך ומתמעט בשכונתו, that his shul became smaller, דאגתו למשפחתו, ועוד כהנה וכהנה. בכל דמעה, in every tear, נקשרו יחד עבר והווה, past and present, זיכרונות רחוקים ודאגות היום-יום. In every tear that he had, the crying of the past and the present, of his old memories and the present worries, they all sort of blend together in the tears of the rabbi on Leil Tisha B'Av. He continues the story, but we're going to stop here with the story and we're going to stop the sharing. But I would like to suggest that I think that from this story, what we come along and see is that I think that Megillat Eicha invites us on Leil Tisha B'Av to try to give ourselves to that motion or to an emotional state of mamash actually to cry, which is something that we really don't do. And I think that in today's day and age, I think that I can say about myself that in COVID-19 and everything that's been happening to us in the last few months, I feel like we take immense amounts of strength and optimism and looking at the positive, to get ourselves going and to get out of bed in the morning and to do our thing and to be proactive and productive and happy and to find those happy moments. But I think that with everything that we've been through in the last half a year, Tisha B'Av lets us say, Chevre, there's a day in the year that you can cry and you can mourn and you can be sad and you can connect all the hard feelings that we have in our present day with those hard feelings that the Jewish people and the world we have experienced for 2,000 years. And I think that sometimes the ability to cry or a shoulder to cry on, I think we all know that it can be a great blessing and a great bracha, the ability to livkot. And Megillat Eicha tells us, B'chot tivke, al ele eini bochia. And I think that when we see and we look at the Jewish people that has been crying on this night, on Leil Tisha B'Av for 2,000 years, it invites us on Tisha B'Av on 2020 to say, mutar gam livkot. It's also okay to להתחבר, to connect to those hard moments, to the bechi, from Chet HaMeraglim, through Beit Rishon, Beit Sheni, the exiles, the Shoah, etc. And if in a humble way to connect it to the galut of the galut of the shuls of 2020, the fact that our batei knesiot are all empty, wherever we are in Israel or abroad or in America, and to sort of connect the galut of Tisha B'Av 2020 to the galut that the Jewish people have experienced through the years. And I think that invitation to livkot, that the poal bechi that appears again and again in Megillat Eicha and again in the Haftarah tomorrow says, it's all right. We don't always allow it to ourselves, 364 days a year. אבל בליל תשעה באב זה בסדר. I have 1 minute left and I want to end on an optimistic note. And I think that we cry, and also in Tanakh you can see it also, that crying is an expression of deep emotion. It's the first thing that when a baby comes to the world, you hear him or her cry. And bechi is something that also expresses great simcha and also expresses great avelut. So on Leil Tisha B'Av, that bechi is a bechi of avelut and of crying and of mourning in the sad sense. But bechi also can become something of great simcha, of a new life coming to the world, of reuniting. One of the characters that cry the most in Tanakh is Yaakov Avinu. He cries also in Mechirat Yosef, and he cries also when he meets Rachel, and he cries again when he reunites with Yosef. And he shows us that this vayevk, the ability to cry, is really that moment where what's inside and what's outside are synced with each other. And while I want to say that Tisha B'Av is a laila of bechi, so I want to say to ourselves that I think we can allow ourselves on Tisha B'Av, again, to be in that moment of hardship and of difficulty, because we're in a time like that. It's a difficult and a hard time, but also to pray that it should be a bechi of simcha, that we should be able to really, just like tonight, we're expressing the mourning and the suffering of Yerushalayim and the galut from the batei knesset and all of the suffering that's happening now in the world. We should also be zochet lirot bebinyan Yerushalayim, and the bechi and the dmaot should be dmaot shel simcha and of life and of rebuilding. So it should be a meaningful Tisha B'Av to everybody, and we should allow ourselves livkot and allow ourselves also be'ezrat Hashem lirot benechamat Yerushalayim. Just on time, Aryeh, 10:20.
Amazing. Beautiful. Thank you so much. Thank you, Miriam Coren. We'll now turn over screens to Rav Zev Rosenfeld, head of the Mourning. One second.
I'd like to tell stories. This is a true story. It happened to me this past Friday night, and it continues the theme of Miriam. I'm not a crier. I'm not a person that cries easily. Miriam invited us to cry. I'm not one of those people. But Friday night, I cried with real tears. I'm telling you a true story. This was going to be my 20th year in camp. I have not spent a Tisha B'Av in Israel for the past 19 years. The past 19 years, every time we began singing Lecha Dodi to the tune of Eli Tzion Ve'area, and as you know, Lecha Dodi, only the first two and the last stanza are about Shabbat. The rest of the stanzas are all about Yerushalayim, Mikdash Melech, Ir Melucha, Hitnari Me'afar Kumi. All those stanzas are about Yerushalayim. And every year in camp, as I sat either in the Beit Knesset or on the porch of the Chadar Ochel, and I looked out. So sometimes if I was in the Beit Knesset, I looked out thinking about Yerushalayim, but all they saw was the garbage dump behind the Chadar Ochel. And you know, it just didn't do it for me. Thinking about Yerushalayim, but seeing the garbage dump didn't make me cry. Friday night, 3 days ago, I was outside because we're davening outside, and from where I live, we can see the hills of Yerushalayim. And as we started to sing Lecha Dodi to the tune of Eli Tzion Ve'area, and I started to say, wake up, brush off your dust. He's Na'ari Me'afar Kumi, Livshi Bigdei Tifartech, wear your clothes of glory, Yerushalayim. And there were the hills of Yerushalayim in front of me. I tell you a true story. I started to cry. So, Miriam, it actually works. We can really cry. I want to talk tonight about the word Churban. I want to talk about 5 meanings of the word Churban to answer 2 questions. The first question is, we're in the times of Medinat Israel. It's hard for us, especially here, to feel that we're missing something. How can we feel and mourn for Churban? And more so, what does it mean? What does Churban mean to us in 2020? I want to bring 5 meanings that will help us answer both those questions. For meaning number 1 is a halachic meaning. Usually we think about Churban as destruction. But no, according to halacha, I'd like to show quickly that Churban does not necessarily mean destruction, but means not owned by Jews. The Gemara in Masechet Moed Katan says that if you see Arei Yehuda or the Mikdash or Yerushalayim, you tear kriya. And then the Beit Yosef says that if you see Yerushalayim again, you tear kriya. And when you see the Beit Mikdash in its destruction, you tear kriya. But then when it comes to Shulchan Aruch, it says Haroeh Arei Yehuda bechurbanan. When you see the cities of Yehuda in their destruction, you tear kriya. And if you look at the Mishnah Berurah on the bottom, he has an interesting definition for the word bechurbanan. He doesn't call it destruction. He says, meaning the definition of Churban is a surprising one. It's not destruction. It's areas of importance to the Jewish people, whether it's parts of Yerushalayim or parts of Yehuda, Hebron, Bethlehem. If they're owned by Jews, Jewishly ruled, they're not considered to be Churban. Churban in this context isn't only destroyed physically, but depends who rules it. That's the first idea of Churban. But then now I'd like to get into 4 ideas that are not halakhic. Churban, I'd like to say, is broken. If I take a glass or a jar and I throw it on the floor, it is now broken. If I take those pieces of the broken glass or broken clay and I glue them together, is it fixed? Not really. It doesn't look so new. It probably has some cracks, and water will seep through the cracks. I'd like to say that even though it seems that we have a Medina and we are so far away from the Galut that we knew until 100 years ago, and it seems that we've gone so far in Jewish history, we're fixed. But I think that we're still broken. We're like a clay that is a clay vessel, a kli, that we stuck the pieces, we glue the pieces together again. But that doesn't mean that we're fixed altogether yet. I'd like to talk about the heart. If somebody has a heart attack, and they give him a pacemaker, and they give him whatever he needs so that he can start his life again, is he healthy? He's probably more healthy than he was before he had a heart attack, or before he was fixed, I apologize. But he's not fully safe. He's still in a matter of danger. A man who has a heart disease in the corona times, he's what they say in Hebrew, a kvutzat tikun. He's in the group of people that still have to be very cautious. I'd like to say that there's a story in Masechet Gittin, in the Dapim, in the Daf Zayin, all the stories that the Gemara tells about the stories of the Churban. The Gemara is a story about a place called Kfar Schania, and it was destroyed. And the Gemara isn't sure why it would be destroyed. Tzadikim kulehai maitam ha'inus. If there were such good people in that town, why were they destroyed? And the Gemara has an answer. Because they did not mourn for Yerushalayim. And the Maharal wants to know, okay, so what? If they were good people, why did they have to be destroyed just because they didn't mourn for Yerushalayim? And the Maharal comes back to our theme of the heart. We all know that a human body without a heart is worthless. Maharal says we have to understand that kasher haguf nechlach min halev, halev hu kiyum shel ha'adam, vaz ein kiyum laguf. Just like if a person is disconnected from his heart, his body is meaningless because the source of life is from his heart. Lefichach, kasher lo yu mitablim al Yerushalayim shi domeh kmo halev elaguf. Yerushalayim is our heart. The body is the Jewish people, but the heart of the Jewish people is Yerushalayim. You can have a tremendous body, fully built. He went all the way to the gym every day and he worked out, but his heart is disconnected. What's his body worth? It's like broken pieces of glass glued together, but it's still broken without a heart. And if we built up a nice town with tzaddikim, but we weren't connected to Yerushalayim and we weren't mourning for Yerushalayim, it's like not connected to the heart. And causes a town like that to feel disconnected to Yerushalayim. The Maharal has one more line. Ki mikoch habracha shehaya sham, lo haya hem rak simcha. Fichach kasher ra'u litabel Yerushalayim, ze lo haya. They had great life in that town, Kfar Schania. They probably had many Jewish restaurants. They probably had yeshivas and mikvaot, and they had great Jewish life. They had such good life that they didn't feel the need to mourn over Yerushalayim. I think that the second meaning for Churban is understanding that even though we've gone so far in our Jewish history, we're still broken. We're like many pieces put together. We still have to hope that we get our heart back to keep our body ticking. Rav Yaakov Emden has an amazing line. He lived somewhere in Europe, I believe in Germany, and he said, crazy line. When we lived in peaceful times in our town in Europe, in Europe, when times were so good, they said, you know what? We don't need Yerushalayim. We don't need Eretz Yisrael because our Jewish life here is so good. And that is Churban. That is Churban because you don't realize that you're broken. When you think that you're a beautiful vessel, you don't realize that it's broken pieces put together. That is Churban. I'd like to move on to the third idea of Churban. I believe that Churban is something that was with us and that is now gone, but we remember. This year we're supposed to be the Olympics in Tokyo. I'm a big fan of the Olympics. I love watching the Olympics. But 1972, Israel had a great dilemma. 24 years after the state was established, 27 years after the Holocaust is over, that year, 1972, as we all know, the Olympics were in Germany, back in Germany. Israel, go or not go? Participate or not participate? Big dilemma. I don't know what happened. We sent our athletes to participate in the Olympics. 11 murdered. And then since then, we've been begging every single time that the Olympics take place. We have begged the official Olympic Committee, please give us a moment of silence in the opening ceremonies of the Olympics. Every year, every 2 years in the winter, every 4 years in the winter, every 4 years in the summer, we get the same answer. The answer is there's no place for a moment of mourning in a celebrated ceremony, like the opening events. Just this year, Miri Regev, the minister, I think in the new government, but she was the minister of sports. She spoke with the Japanese prime minister who's no longer the prime minister, and he was appointed to be the head of the Tokyo Japanese committee to run the Olympics. She said, please, just now, in 2018, leading up to the 2020 Olympics, she said, a moment of silence to remember the Israelis. And the answer was the same answer. We don't believe that there's a place for mourning in a celebrated event. That is so much against what we believe in. We believe that in the most celebrated moment of a wedding, we take a moment of silence to break a glass. So many times we take a moment, whether it's Yizkar on Yom Tov, or it's Shabbos, we say Avarachamim before Musaf, we take times to remember. I did a check, and I wanted to know if there's a concept of Yortzeit in the whole world. And guess what? Almost nowhere in the world, maybe I'll call it maybe in the Western world, there's no concept of Yortzeit. You can see it here. In the Eastern countries, there's a concept of a death anniversary. But in Europe, modern thinking, forward-thinking Europe, modern thinking North America, there is no concept of a Yortzeit, of a death anniversary. To me, that means that when a person dies, it's sad. If you ask a European or North American person, a person dies, it's sad, you bury him, but you move on in life. But to us, a Yortzeit is an annual event where we say Kaddish, when the family gets together, we remember, we learn Torah in his memory. Remembering is what we believe holds us stronger than all the different nations that came up against us throughout the years. They've come and gone. I believe one of the things that holds us together is this definition of Churban, that I'd like to say. Churban is something that we had, is no longer, but we remember. It's one of our Jewish secrets that we never forget. And we're not afraid to take a happy moment and to take a happy celebration and to stop for a moment. Churban, that's our third definition. And now I'd like to give a fourth understanding of the word Churban. I think that the Churban means distance. Just today, about an hour and a half ago, in the first parak of Eicha, it mentioned Rachok. Many of the things that I'm discussing today, I have a whole compilation of ideas of Churban. Some of them I pulled from different places. I saw a few ideas in YU to go. I went through some of their ideas about Tisha in the past. I saw a cute story where a poor person came to a rich person's house asking for money, asking for food. The rich person was a miser. The rich person said, go away, I have nothing to give you. When the poor person pleaded, please give me something, the rich person took him to the garbage dump of his house, garbage pail, and he said, let me look through what I have. He pulled out a piece of fish from 2 days ago. It started to rot. He said, here, this is what I have to give you. The poor person, hungry as can be, devoured that piece of fish, but he got sick. When the rich person came to Mincha, he heard that the poor person was sick, so he said, great, I have a chance to go do Bikur Cholim. When the rich person came to Marav, he heard that the poor person had died. He said, great, I have a chance to go to a funeral, Levaya. But the next morning at Shachris, the rich person heard that the poor person's son is sitting Shiva. He said, great, I have a chance to do Nichum Avelim, a Shiva call. The rich person came home, his wife saw him and said, why are you so happy? He said, look, one piece of rotten fish, and it gave me so many mitzvahs. Bikur Cholim, Nichum Avelim. and going to Levaya. What a great opportunity for one piece of fish. It's a cynical joke, but there is something common. What is common between the mourning, poverty, illness, and even davening? The word hamakom. We know that Ashkenazim, when we go to a shiva, we say hamakom yinachem etchem b'toch sha'ar Yerushalayim. The Gemara says when a person is poor, you say to him hamakom yimalech chesroncha. May the place refill what you're missing. If a person is sick, it says in the Gemara and the Shulchan Aruch that you should say hamakom yimalei rachamim alecha v'al cholei Yisrael. The place of God should make you feel better. And we all know the song that we sing in Slow Shirah. Hamakom yirachem, yirachem aleim, the hamakom. Why? In all of these four opportunities, do we not call him God or HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but we call him hamakom? Rav Zev said, hamakom means that I feel distant from God because God is not close to me, but He is up there. Mimkomo Baruch Kvod Hashem. Mimkomo, when God is far from me, or I feel far from God, that's what I feel when I'm mourning, or when I'm needy, or when I'm sick, or when I need to turn out because I'm feeling distant from God. I'd like to say, Churban is distance. I feel distant from whatever it is I'm mourning over. And in this case, I think that we feel distant from God because the Shekhinah that was in the Mikdash is what we're mourning for. The Mikdash is a building, Eitzim Vavanim. What was crucial about that Beit Mikdash to us was that was our connection with God, and now we're feeling the distance from God. But I think that one of the most central words in what we're going through in our Corona times is social distancing. And we're such social people. That's part of what our society lives on. It's very hard for us to be alone, distant. But now, in 2020, even with Medinat Israel and especially with Corona, we're still feeling distance from people. But on Tisha B'Av, we think about the distance that we feel from God. And I would like to talk about the last and final meaning that I believe Churban invites us to discuss. I'd like to say that Churban means danger and opportunity. I don't speak Chinese. If anything, I'm not so happy with the Chinese these days. It could be that the Corona came from China, but you know what? Let's learn Chinese for a second. What we see here is two words connected to each other that make one idea. John F. Kennedy once said that when written in Chinese, the word crisis is composed of two characters, one representing danger and the other represents opportunity. When we have Churban, it means that we are in a certain kind of crisis. Crisis gives you an opportunity to think about the danger that you're in, what the messages the danger can teach us. Maybe we have to fix our ways. Maybe God is trying to give us some kind of signal here. But within that signal, God is almost saying to you, you have an opportunity to start again. I'm not giving up on you so fast. I'm giving you a challenge. I'm giving you a crisis. But I'm giving you an opportunity to start again. Mourning is saying, I've lost something and I'm in the middle of a crisis, but I'm going to get up and I'm going to find a way to pull my life together again as an individual or as a nation or maybe in Corona times as a world. I'm trying to think what opportunities we can think of. Every nisayon, if you look at the Medrash on the right-hand side, Lokim Nisat Avraham, the Medrash says every nisayon is an entrance to Gidulin. Nisayon, achar nisayon, v'gidulim acharim b'shvil l'nasotam ba'olam, b'shvil l'gadlam ba'olam. When God gives us challenges, it's just a way to give us a way to greaten ourselves, to come out greater and stronger. And the Musar book, Orchot Chaim, says, Hatzarot hem letovato v'lehitiv b'achareito. When a person has tzarot, it's not fun. Churban is not fun. but it's if you look at it in the right way, it's a way to come out stronger and to come out better. Rav Soloveitchik famously says, instead of asking lama when you have a challenging time, ask about lema. And I think that that's the two halves of Tisha B'Av that we have. Every year we get up from our low chairs on Chatzot and go back and put on tefillin on after Mincha. We sit on higher chairs after Mincha. Why? I think that's the two sides of the Chinese symbol. There's danger and there's opportunity. There's Churban and then there's coming out of Churban, because if we learn the proper lessons from Churban, we can come out strengthened. So we've discussed many sides of Churban. And I hope that by the time we reach the end of this tragic day where we talk about all the tragedies of Jewish people, I hope that from the different aspects of Churban, we can also come out much strengthened individually and as a Jewish people.
All right. Thank you very much, Rav Zev. Thank you everybody for joining us tonight.